Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Tanjil Rashid. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
I'll just introduce you for those who don't know you. Tanjil is a British journalist currently working as the culture editor at the New Statesman magazine in London. He's also written regularly for the Financial Times, the Times, the Guardian, the TLS, that's the Times Literary Supplement, the Washington Post, and others. He also spent a decade working in television, producing and directing documentaries and current affairs programming for the BBC and other national and international networks, including the award-winning Storming the Capitol, The Inside Story, Ukraine, A Year of War, and Ramadan, A Journey Across Britain. Now, recently you published a powerful article in the New Statesman titled, and I'll just get it up the screen here so we can all see it. Here it is: "The Age of Deportation. The haven that Britain once was is being dismantled. In its place, a fortress rises," by Tanjil Rashid. Now, the New Statesman is a venerable magazine that's been publishing regularly since 1913, as you can see. And this particular article of yours, which I've read, and it's a very powerful article, is on the front cover of the current edition of the New Statesman. And there's a very ominous looking image there on the right, this kind of whale-like cargo ship engulfing these orange jacketed people, inverted commas, illegal immigrants. Reminded me a little bit of Guantanamo Bay, the color of their jackets, but it's a very striking image as well. So I just wanted to, if I may, just read the first two paragraphs of this important article, which I'll link to in the description below, everyone. So I do encourage everyone to read it, because the opening paragraphs are very significant. So you write at the beginning: "A few years ago, as I cycle through my home stretch of northeast London, my tire punctured. I got off my bike and locked it in a residential street. Returning a few hours later, I was shocked. A wheel was missing. I stood there exclaiming curses on our delinquent nation, our low trust society, our crime-ridden streets." I can imagine how awful that must have been. "Then a door opened behind me. 'Don't worry,' said the man standing in the doorway with a smile. There it was in his hand, my front wheel." Extraordinary. "He then reassembled my bike. The tire was now firm, its puncture repaired. My benefactor turned out to be an asylum seeker holed up in a Home Office property in Ilford, which is just east of London. Barred from work, he had time on his hands and he spent it fixing bicycles, for which his hometown in Eritrea was famous. The money I offered was refused, even when government policy would suggest he lived off a mere £5 a day, which in London is like nothing. He mended my bike," he said, "as a gift." So it's an extraordinary story. But why did you share this story?
Well, I wanted to portray asylum seekers, illegal migrants, and so on. You know, these terms that are bandied about in the media, normally in much less palatable stories. You know, horrible stories about sex criminals and violent sort of people of all sorts. And this seems to be the prevailing image now of illegal migrants and asylum seekers, and that hasn't been helped by numerous documented cases of such individuals. But we've been sort of programmed now to think about all of them as if they were sort of nasty, aggressive people who shouldn't be here. And I remembered this story from a couple of years ago, and I thought, he was a very different tale, and yes, it's just one story, it's one incident. I can't claim that every asylum seeker is is just like that, but it's something different, And
Yeah,
I felt it was my responsibility as a member of the media, as a journalist,
yeah,
to tell a different story. I mean, there are many stories to be told here, and we're only telling, at the moment, it seems to me, a certain kind of a certain kind of narrative that is frankly dehumanizing.
yeah,
To a vast number of people. Yes, they are a vast number of people, and maybe that shouldn't be the case. That's a whole other issue. But with that story, I just wanted to portray and humanize people who have really been sort of suffering from a crisis of nefarious misrepresentation.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's true to say, isn't it, that this individual was a Muslim as well. So,
Right. I mean, I didn't mention that in the piece, but you can read between the lines. This
mm,
gentleman was from Eritrea. He was a Muslim. That was quickly established, as you know. Among Muslims, it's quite easy, and it's a lovely thing to recognize each other as Muslims. You salam each other and that sort of
yeah,
thing, and that's that moment passed between us, and it brought us together to a degree.
yeah,
Now, it was a very strange thing for him to do, and in some ways, it may reflect a slightly different outlook on life. I guess
mm,
he was from a much less individualistic society
mm,
where everyone sees it as their responsibility to fix each other's property or to look after each other's property, and we don't have that outlook. A
no,
neighbor would never just sort of without permission handle your property to fix it. So you can sense there's sort of a different outlook, but in many ways, I think a better one. I mean, he didn't think there was anything odd about repairing someone else's bicycle for free without their permission. Now, I, being a Westerner, instinctively find that a bit odd. Um,
mm.
and so the story, this incident really stayed with me. I think there's a lot to be unpacked there.
Well,
Uh,
and you do in your article, you say in another paragraph, which making the point even more, practically skilled, self-reliant, generous, this vigilante cycle repairist like that, is the sort of person Britain should be keeping, not turning out. We need his skills, his youth, his communal spiritedness. He has his own needs too, for a home, for refuge from a state that enslaves men as forced labor. The reason why tiny Eritrea is the second most common source of illegal arrivals after Afghanistan. Among refugees, exemplary characters like this are legion. I have met them, you say, while volunteering, reporting, worshipping. They far outnumber the criminals whose cases are provocatively trumpeted before the public. It's interesting, Eritrea, who, to be honest, has not been in my consciousness at all recently, is the second most common source of illegal arrivals. And I had to look this up. When I first read your article, I thought, why Eritrea? What's going on there? And indeed, it's according to the reports, there's terrible things happening in terms of forced conscription that just goes on forever, political repression, and so on. So people are leaving that country naturally, and some are ending up on our shores.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Eritrea, as you say, is the second most common point of origin for illegal arrivals into the UK. Eritrea is a tiny country.
Mm,
Clearly something odd is going on in that place. It doesn't follow any economic logic that this tiny country should produce so many illegal migrants. Um, we know that the government there is a very repressive one, and it's basically conscripting the sort of male population of the country and using them as forced labor. And if you look at the list of places, countries that illegal migrants are coming from, in the main, it correlates with indexes of persecution around the world. Afghanistan is top, Eritrea is second. It does more or less correlate with what we know about war and persecution throughout the world. It doesn't correlate with, in the main, with the idea that these are all entirely economic migrants. Now, of course, I'm willing to concede that a lot of them will be economic migrants, but these terms are not very clearly defined, and at the end of the day, it's hard to discern the difference between migrating to earn a living and migrating to save your life. Even the language, as I just put it there, is quite similar: living life, earning a living, saving a life. I mean, if you can't earn a living, you will die, at a brutal level. And anyone who's fleeing war and persecution still needs to earn a living. They still need to come here, and they will still need to work. So I don't think there's really such a clear distinction, and it may well be argued, probably should be argued, that our laws, our international laws and conventions, but probably need to be updated to take that fully into account.
Yeah, indeed. Just to quote a bit more, because your argument develops beyond this. You say, no asylum, this is what you write in the article, no asylum seeker should be allowed to remain, according to Nigel Farage. He's the leader of the Reform Party, which is in the ascendancy politically in the UK, who will like...
According to pollsters, should most likely be the next Prime Minister, but I don't know if they're right.
No, well, time will tell. Of course, anything can happen. A week is a long time in politics, so anything could happen between now and the next election. And then you say, shelving the laws that allow immigrants fleeing war and persecution to make Britain their home after arriving illegally, he would deport them. So he would deport everyone, all asylum seekers. And then you say, our desire to eject asylum seekers today is really the barely concealed expression of an enveloping disillusionment with immigration generally, even of the legal kind. I think this is a very good point. It's propelling us out of an age of migration and into something altogether new, an age of deportation, which is the title really of your point of your article. You also say deportation has long been a dirty word linked to fascism. This is the mass deportations of people in the 1920s and 1930s, of course. So it has quite a lot of baggage attached to it, this term. But the Overton window seems to have shifted relatively recently in British politics and perhaps the West in general to now make this kind of language of deportation or remigration, re-immigration or remigration almost acceptable in mainstream discourse now. And amongst the many conservatives, Reform, of course, and even the Labour Party is to an extent kind of accommodating itself to this new reality, it seems.
That's right. Not long ago, even Reform were poo-pooing any suggestion that so many people, as they're proposing, could be deported. 600,000 is their proposed number, and that's based on their idea of how many illegal immigrants there are in the UK. And Nigel Farage, not more than a year ago, said that the very idea was impossible. And actually, members of his party, including himself and his lieutenant Zia Yusuf, sort of forced Rupert Lowe out of the party for having such an outrageous policy. Now they're trumpeting this policy, much to the acclaim and celebration of the hard right and indeed the far right, because although their policy is quite carefully targeted at illegal immigrants, it's really signaling to the right and to the far right that they're willing to take on migration generally, even of the legal kind. And I've noticed sort of not particularly pleasant circumstances that most of the people, in my view, supporting these policies basically want to deport legal immigrants and indeed British citizens who belong to ethnic minorities. And I know this because since I wrote this article, I received several hundred messages saying words to that effect, saying that I should
Really?
be deported. Yeah, my family should be deported. People, people from South Asia should be deported. I say people from South Asia. There's another word that they tend to use for that. So I really don't believe the politicians when they say they're just talking about illegal
Yes.
migrants, because what they're saying belongs to a rhetorical ecosystem in which their words are understood to mean, um, migrants of any kind, legal immigrants, British people who might have foreign ancestry of some kind.
Mm.
Um, that's what's really going on. It is, the dog whistle that we talk about.
Yes, yes. This is very, very. We can't avoid talking about Tommy Robinson. Unfortunately, now he wasn't mentioned at all in your article, and wasn't really the subject of your article at all. But nevertheless, tomorrow, or is it today, or today and tomorrow, that there is a major demonstration in London, led by him, called by him. He's all over social media. He's got 1.5 million followers on X/Twitter. Big demo going on, and he seems to be rallying, not just rallying the right and the far right over so-called illegal immigrants. Although you're right, his catchment is wider, particularly Muslims. But he also seems to be riding on this, the assassination recently of Charlie Kirk in the United States, this Christian nationalist, who Tommy Robinson seems to say. I think he put up a tweet yesterday saying, I am Charlie. This is referring back to the I am the Hebdo, the Charlie Hebdo thing in France. So I think the coincidence of the Charlie Kirk assassination, plus with this rising anti-illegal immigration rhetoric, is bolstering and boosting not just Tommy Robinson, but his whole kind of movement. And this is focused this weekend on London, and maybe it's in other cities as well. How significant is this trend around Tommy Robinson and his followers? Do
So I don't specifically mention Tommy Robinson or what's happening this weekend, because the article was, had long been printed by that point. But I do get into the other phenomenon, the related phenomenon of
Mm.
the kind of flag waving mania, or
Yes.
flag scrawling mania, where we've had this sort of national outburst of depicting flags all over the place, and flying them everywhere, which is obviously fine, but also vandalizing property, or with flags, scrawling at a private property, using the flag in a very pointed and racially provocative way,
Mm.
which has been going on, and I do think that's clearly connected to the deportation mania. I mean, flags and deportations are both connected in the sense that they are both ways of defining and articulating the English nation, and this is what's interesting and significant about the kind of support for deportation, is that it's not simply a policy for them. It's not simply a policy as it is for the Labour government, where they want to, for various practical reasons, deport certain legal immigrants, especially foreign criminals and things like that. That's simply, a policy for them. For the new right and for the far right, deportations are actually something much more significant and menacing. That is to say, it is a way of defining who gets to be English, and
Yes.
it's in that sense very connected to the flag mania that we've had. And I'm not opposed to flags, by the way. I'm very fond of all our flags: Union Jack, the Cross of St George. I'm very fond of these as symbols. But what what we need to sort of unpack here is what do these flags mean in this context, and it's of a piece with deportations. That is to say, it is part of a vision of English nationalism, of a pure English nation, where foreigners will be expelled and the nation will be purified, and that's really what's going on.
That slides quite quickly into fascism, doesn't it? Really, of its Italian or National Socialist varieties. I mean, it's very similar, if not exactly the same, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've got to that point, but what really disturbs me, what basically animated me in writing this piece, is the spectre of something like fascism. As I say, deportations, mass deportations, are things you only really historically see in quite unsavory political contexts, including fascism. That was the last time you had mass deportations. They say during the Second World War and after the Second World War, when in the aftermath of the war, Germans, for instance, were deported en masse out of various countries where they had long been living. So mass deportation is a really nasty thing. I'm not opposed to deportation of foreign criminals, for instance, who are illegally here. I don't think that's unreasonable, but mass deportations, where you're deporting 1 in every 100 from the streets of Britain, even if they are illegally here, that's quite an unprecedented and disturbing thing. It's not the kind of thing you want to see in a country like Britain that has never experienced fascism. It would really be quite unprecedented. And we're using this term deportation without any sort of shame around it, in the way that in countries that have experienced mass deportation, there is a sort of taboo. Deportation is a dirty word. In France and Germany, they use the term remigration, because the memory of mass deportation.
But doesn't it mean the same? No, but doesn't it mean the same thing? I mean, isn't it just semantics? It's a synonym, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it is.
if the concept is the same, well, why are people getting you haven't said deportation, you said remigrating. It's not the same thing. Of course, it's the same thing. It's the same concept.
It is the same concept, but that's how you smuggle in old and discredited ideas back into the discourse. And politics is shaped by rhetoric, and rhetoric can be manipulated through careful and euphemistic language. And that's what remigration is all about. A remigration, which I think is slowly entering the British political discourse as well. People like former MP Douglas Carswell have started using this in the Daily Telegraph, and and there have been so many different words that have been used to denote the same thing. That is to say, deportation, remigration, repatriation, self-deportation, where it's like, it's your choice, just self-deport. So there are lots of words here that denote slightly different things, but more or less are part of the same vision of purifying the English nation.
This thing about purification, I just want to read a sentence or two from your article, because it's not just generalized kind of non-English people, whatever that means. You say it's becoming disingenuous to say that these simply concern illegal immigrants, when the accompanying rhetoric is embroiled in resurgent Powell-like Anglomania. You're referring there to Powell, who was arguably a far-right figure in the 20th century in England. From Epping to the sea, let's make England Abdul free, proclaimed the former MP Douglas Carswell, you just mentioned, in the exultant days after reform announced its mass deportation plans resembling in minute details those Carlson Carswell had outlined in a Telegraph column earlier this year. So this is an MP saying, "From Epping to the sea, let's make England Abdul free," obviously echoing or parroting another slogan, which we won't mention. But the point here is that Abdul free, this is a dog whistle for Muslims, obviously, short for Abdullah, servant or slave of God, slave of Allah. So this is not just generalized illegal immigrants from wherever. This is Muslims he's targeting here, isn't it?
That's completely right. I don't really get into that in the piece simply because you can't get into everything, but the Islamophobic subtext to all of this is very significant, and in many cases, it isn't a subtext, as in the case of Douglas
Yeah.
Carswell, who's just sort of quite open about it.
Yeah.
Much of the frenzy around deportation sort of really began when Rupert Lowe, aided by Elon Musk's X, was able to make the deportation of Britain's Pakistani community a kind of cause célèbre, because he felt that Pakistanis were exclusively responsible for the rape gangs of children especially in the north of England, and obviously many Pakistanis were implicated, or not more than implicated, were responsible for these horrible crimes. And therefore, as a consequence, the Pakistani community had to be deported because he argued that they were complicit. Now, he didn't say every Pakistani, but basically he said that he implied that most Pakistanis were involved in these crimes or had values that were supportive of them, and therefore had to be expelled. So being a Muslim, I can hardly ignore the fact that this subtext that it's about deporting people like me, and that's partly why I felt the need to write this essay, because it is really about a lot more than just the deportation of illegal migrants because they shouldn't be here. It's about redefining the nation in a fundamentally Islamophobic way, and overturning the, by this point, centuries old conception of Britain as a composite nation that anyone could effectively translate themselves into. And this is the idea of Britain that basically starts to manifest in the 18th century, and with the growth of the British Empire, becomes a quite well-articulated idea. What should they know of England who only England know? The poet Rudyard Kipling famously asked. Kipling, who was born in India, and whose father was a great lover of Indian culture, who founded the famous museum in Lahore, and Lockwood Kipling. The Kiplings were English, and they were, in a sense, Indian or South Asian, and families like mine are South Asian and they are British, and this possibility of being British and being from somewhere else is one of the core features of British history in its imperial age. A lot of people on the left have, rightly criticised the British Empire, which I don't disagree with. But the idea of Britain as a multicultural society is essentially an imperial one. It is an outgrowth of the imperial ideology, that Britain is essentially a global nation, and England too is essentially a global nation. You can't just know England. England is a confluence of the world, and this idea arises, from the British Empire, and it has stayed with us until, I think, basically now. It's the imperial legacy that facilitated the arrival, into Britain of families like mine and families like those who were, from the West Indies with the Windrush generation. We came as citizens of the British Empire with the right to be here.
Who were invited here to rebuild Britain after the Second World War, to work in our factories up in Lancashire, to support our NHS, our transportation system, and so on. We needed people from the British Empire that were welcomed here. Now all that has gone. Now the empire's gone, and that welcome I think is gone as well. But these were not illegal immigrants. The first generations of people who came from what is now Pakistan or Bangladesh or India or other places were welcomed and became citizens. And one thing that I always find annoying and frustrating in this whole discussion about Muslims in Britain is this exaggerated, often misleading understanding of what Muslims actually are in Britain, what we do here in Britain. There's an immense amount of commonality, actually. We all care about good schools, about law and order, about safe streets. We all want to be neighborly. We want to be good citizens. We all care about the upbringing of our children and traditional values. Muslims are very keen on traditional values, of course. So there's an awful lot of good and positive, I think, that Muslims do and seek to do in building up our communities and giving in charity. I mean, Muslims are second to none in charitable work in the United Kingdom. This is well known and statistically confirmed. So the fact that we may have a different religious belief, but we as Muslims do affirm Jesus Christ, for example, as the Messiah, as a prophet sent by God, born of the Virgin Mary. The Quran teaches this, that he will return. It's the only religion other than Christianity that actually honors Jesus. We don't worship him, we love him, we honor him. As I say, the Quran mentions him and his mother, Miriam. A whole chapter in the Quran is named after Miriam, or Mary, the mother of Jesus. So we have that in common. We have Jesus himself in common, whereas other religions don't. Jews, unfortunately, historically, have usually rejected Jesus. And yet we're somehow seen as religiously alien, but there is a huge overlap there, as well as in these other sort of social interests that we have in common.
Yes, I completely endorse that point of view. It's something I've argued, in my writing on a few occasions, where we are very natural members of the society, and we fit perfectly into the history of this society, of British society. We practice a religion that is, in many senses, not really a foreign one, although that's how, unfortunately, Islam is perceived by the sort of far right and many on the much less than far right. But yes, you're completely right. We there's a lot of talk in on the right about Western civilization, which unlike a lot of people, let's say on the left, I don't reject. I think Western civilization is a valid historical conception, but it need not be the exclusive one that they imagine. And Islam is essentially it is a Western religion, and for much of history it was regarded as such. It's quite different from actually the religions of the East with which it's sometimes coupled. Islam is a monotheistic religion, as you very well know, blogging theology, alongside Christianity and Judaism, and we have many of the same theological conceptions. We share the same understanding of history that effectively comes from, the age of Abraham. We believe in the same prophets, and we believe in the same kind of broad outline of the unfolding of creation, and the end of creation and the end of existence. So our perspective on the past and the future are basically the same, and quite different from, let's say, what our Hindu or Sikh or Buddhist brethren believe about the world. And in practical terms, as you say, we have all of the the right communal values to contribute to this society. There was a video attacking me after this article by a far right kind of sort of nasty piece of work, really, and he was sort of making the argument that England for the English, etc., etc. And then bizarrely said, well, actually, the Sikhs are okay; they've integrated, but not the Muslims or the but the Sikhs, they believe in. Look, let me tell you what the Sikhs believe. They believe in charity. They believe in helping your neighbor. These are English Protestant values, so the Sikhs are okay. It's a very, very strange and confused argument. I mean, actually, he's correct. The Sikhs, I think, do believe those things, and so do we, and so do
all the major religions do. Actually, this is definitely not a British value any more than law and order is somehow an English British value.
Yeah.
Excuse me, other civilizations also believe in that way before Britain ever existed. No, but I know that Tommy Robinson does this as well. He said, "Oh, I hate the Muslims. They're this, that, and the other." But the Sikhs, I love the Sikhs. And even today on his Twitter feed, you've got a picture of him saying, showing a photograph or a very short film of a Sikh guy being arrested by the police for a tweet. This is the same thing. But promoting and look at the demographics of the far right. The demonstrations this week and the people who are saying they'll come, 99.99% white. So they're not really that inclusive in practice. They might showcase an individual Sikh or something just to say that, oh, we're for you, we're just against the Muslims. This is the subtext, of course. But if you're genuinely concerned about otherness and difference that Muslims allegedly represent, then the Sikhs would get it in the neck as well, but they don't. So
and I mean, English nationalism is a very peculiar thing, and really that's the ideology that's at play here. And although people like Tommy Robinson are frankly too stupid to really know anything about this, but the the right understand the English nation basically to have been repressed by the experience of empire, that this sort of composite cosmopolitan idea of Britain, which came about in the at the start of the 18th century and really took off in the 19th and 20th century, repressed the English ideal, that England became corrupted and sort of fell by the wayside. And as I quote this St. George's Day speech from 1961 by Enoch Powell, in which he basically envisions the English as having been colonized by the British, and he compares the English to Athenians recovering from the collapse of the Persian Empire. And in that analogy, the Athenians are the English and the Persians are the British. And so the English are very confused about, the English nationalists are very confused about this. They kind of see themselves as having been colonized by themselves. And Powell called empire, this whole experience of empire, a national hallucination. And he wanted to move away from this imperial conception of Britain, which unfortunately for him ended up involving the arrival of the formerly colonized people, en masse. And Powell turned against that, and he wanted England to rise again, and he compared England to an old oak in an English garden that was still there, that needed to be rediscovered. And that's what we're seeing today, the recovery of the English nation, or at least a certain idea of the English nation, which is different from Kipling's idea of England, which is an England that can't be separated from the rest of the world. This is an England that is very much the England of an island that is sort of set apart from the rest of the world. An England that wants to stop the boats, whereas the Britain of the past wanted to rule the waves. And so this is really what's going on. And I feel that no one has really properly mapped the intellectual landscape of the resurgent Powellite English nationalism, not least people on the right themselves who are very confused about empire. They love it and they hate it, and they like it on certain terms, but not as it actually was, or they don't really know what's going on. Powell is one of the few figures who actually understood, what the far right today is, and he was basically the prophet of today's age of deportation. And anyone who wants to understand what's going on really has to go and read Enoch Powell, who was a formidable intellectual, and
he wasn't just an isolated figure. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, even the Conservative Party in its manifesto in the early 1970s did mention repatriation as part of its manifesto platforms. This wasn't just Enoch Powell, the lone prophet, inverted commas, very much, but it was party policy of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, Powell always maintained that when he, so for context for our viewers who may not be so well versed in British political history, Enoch Powell gave a famous speech called the Rivers of Blood speech, in which he said around 1968 that because of mass immigration, the black man will have the whip hand over the English. And he was a classicist, and he used this famous image of the river Tiber foaming with much blood, which is a reference to one of the Roman poets. And as Powell says, like the Roman, I see the Tiber foaming with much blood, which was his sort of very sort of bloody sort of vision of a multicultural future in which there would be ethnic unrest. In some ways, he might not have been wrong. Time will tell. I hope he's wrong, but increasingly, I wonder if he, in this regard, might have been right. But yes, where were we? So Powell gave this very sort of incendiary speech, and it caused furore.
Yeah, kicked out of the party, or kicked out of a government job.
He was kicked out. He was sacked by the Conservative Party. And there was basically an uprising on the streets of Britain in support of him, mainly from working class
East London. Dockers, pictures. I also don't remember it, but there are pictures of white dockers working in East London, protesting in favour here of Enoch Powell. Very much so.
Now, Powell always maintained that actually the Conservative Party at the time had a policy of voluntary repatriation, which I think it did, but it was never implemented. It was never
enforced. No, it was just there as a manifesto.
It was just there, and it was just sort of forgotten about. Really, it was about the tone that Powell took. The black man having the whip hand. It was very incendiary language, which to the Tories of the time was sort of beyond the pale.
Edward Heath, particularly the Prime Minister, didn't like him at all.
Yeah, that's right. But it's worth wondering about the Conservative Party today. How alien is that rhetoric? I think it's still pretty alien to a lot of people.
Ironically, it's now led by a black woman herself, ironically, and yet she ironically, because the rhetoric continues despite that fact.
Yeah. Well, this is in itself is an interesting thing. Zia Yusuf of Reform, the sort of de facto chairperson and power broker within Reform, is obviously a Muslim Asian woman, and he's very much fronting these policies. And I guess it's useful to have an ethnic minority individual fronting those policies.
Oh, yeah.
But it also is somewhat reassuring, because I do think Zia Yusuf isn't going to be the sort of person who would deport his own family members. So that is actually, that works. But my difficulty is that I don't think Zia Yusuf knows what he's unleashing on the country.
Playing with fire, isn't he? Playing with fire. If he thinks he can control this, I mean, he's expendable if
Yeah,
reform the next government. I mean, he won't be a key figure if they go ahead with
yeah.
deportations to be got rid of. So
If,
having served his
yeah,
useful function as a kind of token Muslim figure.
yeah, this happens time and again in history. There are useful idiots and fellow travelers that can be taken advantage of in this way.
Exactly.
I have to say, I like Zia Yusuf. I like the sound of him. He seems like a very civic-minded person. I don't attribute any, particularly malicious. I don't think he's a racist or anything like that. But he's
Maybe
using
naive a bit,
well,
naivete.
he's perhaps using racist language at times, but not talking about fighting age males and talking about
Obviously, it's a dog whistle for young Muslim men coming to this
yeah,
country who
yeah,
are then seen as potential terrorists. I mean,
yeah.
again, it's a great slur.
He talks about illegal migrants arriving as if he compares it to the D-Day landings. I mean, this is really horrible language to be normalizing. Um, and yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm very, very pessimistic about where this is going. I kind of feel if reform become the government, they themselves have said, they want to be Trump 2.0 on deportation.
Yeah.
You've seen what's happened in America. Um, American citizens have been sort of deported without due process. They've ended up in prisons in which country is it? Is it El Salvador? And it's and then the government does sort of, oh well, whoops, nothing we can do about that now. And this is really what they're proposing, Trump 2.0.
You
That's
say, yeah, you say in your article, just to read that paragraph where you mentioned Trump 2.0, this age of deportation is a global one. So it's not just a UK obsession. And this is a paradox. The brutal reification of national borders through deportation is now a thoroughly globalized phenomenon. Reform's deportation project is, by its own admission, Trump 2.0. That signals where we are going in the short term, but its plans also mirror the pattern of deportations now rife in many of Britain's former colonies, such as India, which may show the direction of travel in the long term. Now, there's a very interesting point that hadn't occurred to me. I didn't really know about hundreds of ethnically Bengali Indian citizens have been kind of kicked out of India and what's happening there. And you see this as a kind of a global phenomenon, not just a UK obsession or American one.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I really wanted to bring some attention to what's happening in India, where essentially something very similar is happening, but in a much more advanced state. That is to say, the Indian nation is being redefined as a Hindu one, but not only a Hindu one, it's also one that's excluding certain ethnicities like Bengalis, who are Bengali speakers are named in the Indian constitution as being integral to the Indian nation, but Bengali-speaking Indian citizens have just been rounded up and dumped on the border with Bangladesh, actual Indian citizens who have been there for generations, and in Assam especially, which borders Bangladesh, and where in the time of the British Empire, many Bengalis whose ancestral origins are in what is today Bangladesh did migrate to Assam, and generations afterwards, they're now being dubbed foreigners and detained in detention camps, stripped of their citizenship, made stateless, and attempted to be deported. So, this is the worst case scenario of where we're headed in Britain. It's more or less the same phenomenon where you had a essentially multicultural, multinational sort of conception of a nation that was inherited from the empire, but the majority population has felt that their national identity has been repressed by empire, and that is now coming to the fore with Tommy Robinson and English nationalism, and has come to the fore with Modi and the BJP in India, and they want to redefine the nation using deportations as a nation building tool. And I do see this historically. I mean, it's these deportations, these expulsions are very similar to those that were seen in many nascent nation states in the 20th century. It's what happened in Turkey and Greece. Turkey expelled the Greek population and killed much of its Armenian population in an effort to sort of define themselves as a new Turkish nation as opposed to the cosmopolitan Ottoman one, which encompassed many different nationalities in the way that the British Empire did as well. And what we might see in England, I fear, may be very similar to what the Ottoman Empire, the successor states of the Ottoman Empire did, and many of the successor states to the British Empire did. What India and Pakistan did in 1947. England is essentially belatedly experiencing this moment. The imperial British identity had a good innings. It lasted a long time. It started, let's say, in 1707 with the Act of Union between England and Scotland. And it came to encompass the Irish, the Welsh. Very quickly, 1757, within 50 years of the Act of Union, it encompasses Indians. It already by then encompassed the West Indies. And you had this great phenomenon, like the Ottoman Empire, of a polity that consisted of peoples from all over the world. And yes, they came together specifically in the British Isles. And even after the empire, as a sort of legacy of this sort of imperial hubris, we had this universalistic idea of Britain, which manifested itself in the form of multiculturalism and so on. And that, I think, has really come and gone. I think the political establishment is no longer interested in it. The Conservative Party is no longer interested in it, although in the 1950s it was one of the main proponents of this imperial cosmopolitan ideal. Labour is toothless. Reform, I mean, we've talked about reform, and then there's stuff to the right of reform. I think the idea of Britishness that I grew up with is kind of expiring. You've also got Scottish nationalism, which is another thing that's quite significant here. Scotland may very well, I think, in the long run, become independent. I think that's inevitable. And so the idea of Britain is kind of finished. And what we'll have is a resurgent, Powellite, nationalist England.
Gosh.
And it will follow the logic of history that many other nation states have followed. There'll be mass deportations, and I hope to be proven wrong.
Yes, of course, it's a very pessimistic prediction. Of course, you could be wrong. Hopefully, you are, as indeed I'm sure. But we live in a backdrop of Trump in the United States. Where all of this sits very snugly with what's going on there. So I think for the next several years at least, your worst case scenario seems to be quite plausible, I must say. But in the much longer term, who knows? But yeah, we'll see. There are certain things we never predicted. The Overton window so quickly shifting from even reform, even Farage saying deportations on that scale is simply not acceptable, to now saying this is his policy. Who would have thought just a few years ago that we in the West would be supporting, encouraging, and giving diplomatic cover to an actual genocide taking place in the Middle East?
Well, this is the thing we haven't talked about. It's probably the thing we should have talked about the most, because it is connected. What Israel and the great powers are realistically plotting as the solution to what's happening in Gaza is mass deportation. And a mass deportation that is being used by the Israeli state as a nation building and nation refining tool. And they're doing this in complete disregard of the international
Everything.
laws that were devised after the Second World War. And this framework, which includes conventions against genocide, also includes conventions that allow the possibility of refugees, the possibility of migrants to come and claim asylum. So this international framework that's falling apart, that's being destroyed by Israel, by America, and by a potential future reform government that also disapplies these conventions, as they call it. These are things that are all connected, and as I say in my piece, the solution is not to discard all of these profound achievements. It's actually to double down on them, to reinforce them, because the disregard of international law that Israel is demonstrating is precisely the kind of persecution, the kind of violence and war that will create more of a refugee problem. That people from Gaza will be on boats off the coast of Dover very, very soon. And that will, create more problems. So the solution is not to get rid of these conventions; is to double down on them, to reinforce them, to make sure that people are not flagrantly persecuted and oppressed and killed in the way that they are. And then you will solve the refugee problem. These conventions, international law, should be an incentive for Britain and America to stop facilitating genocide and mass murder and creating these refugee problems that they don't want to live with. Right? If you don't want refugees, if you don't want a mass influx of a population,
refugees from Afghanistan, well, maybe we should stop invading, occupying, and killing the people in their country, which obviously we've done. So there's cause and effect, clearly.
Exactly. And so the age of deportation is the wrong solution. It's the wrong solution.
Gosh, that's very pessimistic. I do recommend everyone to read Tanjil's article in the New Statesman. You see the link in the description below. It's on the front cover of the current edition of the New Statesman, a venerable magazine that has been coming out weekly since 1913. Traditionally kind of left of centre, progressive / Fabian, however you want to characterize them. As a counterpart to The Spectator, which is now edited by Michael Gove. I mention that because, the Statesman represents traditionally the left magazine, The Spectator, the right magazine, the right conservative magazine. But Michael Gove is a doughty defender of Israel's actions and genocide, dismissing accusations of genocide and war crimes. So now the Spectator has become a defender of the indefensible, actually. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be much more mainstream, to be honest. But under Michael Gove, the former Tory minister, it's become very, very outspokenly Zionist and provocative, I would say, in its attitudes, its political stance. So the Statesman is the progressive counterpart to that in some ways, I think, and is a very incisive and intelligent journal in many ways. It doesn't mean I agree with all the politics, but nevertheless, the fact that it is showcasing or publishing articles like The Age of Deportation by yourself is excellent news, and I wish a lot of people can read it. It's not behind a paywall, is it, online?
It is behind a paywall, but quite a soft one. I've also put it out there in sort of more easily available forms, which, with a little bit of coding.
Perhaps give me the links to those, and I'll put those in the description below as well, so people can access them.
But thanks for that sort of little overview of the New Statesman. Please, do subscribe. You can subscribe all over the world, and we cover international issues as well as domestic British politics. And also, mainly what I do is cultural criticism, literary criticism. I think we're the best place in Britain and one of the best places in the world for serious coverage of the arts and of literature. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's lots of fun stuff. The piece I wrote before this was an interview with a film director who's famous for sort of quite light-hearted romantic comedies. So there's some fun stuff in there. It's quite easy to subscribe, if you're interested. And
Yeah,
have
and
me.
you're the cultural editor at the New Statesman magazine in London. So thank you. When I stumbled across your article, I was generally impressed by it, and the significance of it and the incisive analysis really impressed. And that's why I'm very honoured that you should come on BT to share your insights in this podcast. So thank you very much.
It's an honor for me. It's an honor for me. I'm a big fan.
Oh, well, that's an added bonus for me. Thank you very much indeed. Well, until next time, thank you very much. And do check out the links in the description below, various links to Tanjil's work, to his website as well. We'll put that up. And thank you very much. Until next time, Tanjil. Salam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum assalam.